what has brought me to the topic of distributed ledger technology and the legal aspects of it is that I'm aware of it as being in its infancy in terms of the adoption of distributed ledger technology and the ability of our legal processes to deal with the use of it. And I feel as if we're at the same sort of early inflection point that we were at in the late 90s when the internet was taking off. And nobody knew how people would use the internet, how people's use of the internet would be governed by existing laws and regulations and standard practice in the industry. There was also a tendency for people to feel as if the internet was a sort of a new world that was outside of and above the existing systems that we had. It was as if the internet was operating on a space station, and people could do anything they wanted to do with the internet without necessarily being concerned about complying with the kinds of laws and regulations that affected earthly people. And we went through a what I would describe as a difficult period. Maybe it seemed more difficult for lawyers and people dealing with them, but a difficult period of the aspirations of people who wanted to use the internet for a vast number of things, coming up against the reality that most of those things were analogs of activities that were already governed by, for example, the securities laws. In the case of people wanting to set up internet sites to trade stocks or to trade debt or to trade mortgages, whatever it was, there was a fever for disintermediation. And it took a while before the various sides of it, the legal, the technology sides, the business community, managed to accommodate each other and find a way to take advantage of the internet in the way that people wanted to, while still complying with, or when necessary, adapting the laws and regulations that would otherwise apply. I think we're at that sort of point with distributed ledger technology, because people see the prospect for using it for almost everything. The view is that it's going to permeate society and that it will take over almost any function that people look at. Enthusiasts for distributed ledger technology see it as supplanting land records, stock exchanges, stock transfer books, just an endless array of things. And the fact is that distributed ledger technology will end up being a very important feature of all of those things. But it's going to have to be adapted to live within the existing laws and regulations and patterns and practices of conduct that have evolved in each specific area to provide the level of market trust and reliability that permits our current system to function. Because no matter what area of commercial activity you look at, there's a package of not just of laws and regulations, but of people with gatekeeper roles who ensure the the rational behavior of actors within that system. And it is a package that results in trust among the participants. And the trust is what permits all of the activity to take place in the first place. People would not buy hot dogs from a hot dog stand if they didn't trust that when they handed over their $2, they would receive a hot dog in exchange. And right now, I feel as if the technology is spinning forward and trying to accomplish a great deal, and I feel as if it's outdistancing the things that permit its use to gain trust and acceptance. And I think that there's a lot to be done in terms of and a lot to be done market by market, commercial activity by commercial activity, in figuring out what the role of distributed ledger technology is going to be and what the trust elements are from our current system, or trust elements that will have to be developed will be in order to gain market acceptance and permit the activity to flourish. What I hope is that people will start to address in the different use cases for distributed ledger technology, what the elements are that provide trust in transactions and permit them to go forward. For example, people talk a lot about using distributed ledger technology to replace stock transfer agents. It seems so easy because shares of stock, after all, are discrete units, and therefore apparently could be represented by units on a blockchain system. But transfers of shares of stock require a lot of different substantive judgments by people who are involved in the process. There are restrictions that are imposed on so-called control shares of public companies, restrictions that are imposed by SEC regulations. There are restrictions imposed on trading of shares by individuals who are 10% shareholders of public companies. There are liens that get placed on shares. There are stop transfer instructions. And to navigate that world of share restrictions, there's a system that involves broker-dealers collecting information from their customers who want to transact in securities, and then taking that information to counsel for the company to get an opinion whether or not the shares can be transferred. That's a gatekeeper function by lawyers in the system that can't be eliminated through a self-executing blockchain network. We have to have in many areas, I'm not saying in all areas, but in many areas we have to have bifurcated systems in which a portion of the transaction could be coded and self-executing. But there's another part of the transaction that for now at least, is going to have to be represented by the normal human language contracts that we currently use. For example, if I want to sell you a Lamborghini, you could say, oh, we'll do that on a blockchain system using Ethereum. We'll just set it up so that the when you transfer title and we'll arrange it so that when the local jurisdiction issues the certificate of title, then that will automatically result in a transfer of Ether currency to you to pay for the car. But the problem is that there's a great deal else that surrounds that transaction. If you're a buyer of a car, you want all sorts of representations about, has the car been in a flood? Has it been in accidents? What's the repair history of it? And you might also want an agreement that if anything turns up with that Lamborghini within the first 6 months after the transaction, that the seller will pay for it or will split the cost of it. There has to be a process for identifying the unknowns that are going to occur in almost any transaction and for resolving disagreements among the parties. What I would like to see develop in these sessions is an understanding of how we are going to use distributed ledger technology to make commercial activity more efficient, more reliable, and more trustworthy, but also make it play well with existing laws and the existing needs of the parties for the protections that get built into traditional contracts. There is an example that's actually had a lot of effort devoted to it in the area of loan syndications. That is, the people who originate syndicated loans in which one or more lenders will buy an interest in the loan and then be able to transfer interest in the loan, have put a great deal of thought into what goes into the use of blockchain in the trading of syndicated loans. And it's an interesting result because that's a case in which the origination of the loan can be effected through a blockchain network, but there isn't a great gain in efficiency just by the origination of the loan through that network. The great gain in efficiency is that it is the shared record that is available to all of the participants in the transaction. You might have a number of syndication participants, an administrator, the borrower or more than one borrower, lawyers, all of whom need to have all the information about the particular syndicated loan. Right now, the way that would work is that people would execute agreements on paper and send PDFs around to each other to reflect the agreement. And then every lender and every borrower and every administrator would go back with those papers and enter the information, the terms of the syndicated loan, on its own legacy system, which creates a tremendous amount of potential for error, disagreement, conflict, and inefficiency. And every time there's a transfer, you have the same inefficiencies that arise. What a distributed ledger would enable participants to do in a syndicated loan transaction is to have one base that is the ultimate source of all of the terms of the transaction, and that everyone, all the participants have access to, and that would permit all of them to have a reliable base of data about the transaction without having to suffer the inefficiencies and error risk of having people at their own companies enter keystrokes to record it. And I think it requires discussion for people to decide how much of any particular activity that they're looking at is susceptible to real gains in efficiency and reliability and reduced costs as a result of use of blockchain. Because there are a lot of people who are using blockchain just because it's the color of the day. There's a reason that initial coin offerings have been so wildly popular, with people throwing money at coin offerings that prove to be not to have any inherent value. They're doing it because they're wildly enthusiastic about the whole concept of digital currency and coins. And the same thing is happening with respect to proposals to use distributed ledger technology in different areas. People want to throw blockchain at everything. And I think we have to go through a process, as I said, of examining each activity and deciding where the gains are and where it doesn't make sense. And that's the discussion that I hope will happen.